Welcome once again. Today we are going to be talking about a topic that I know some people are going to be very excited to get to because during Project 1, I think it was a great source of frustration. So let's take a look at our old friend, the sphere. So here we have a UV sphere, and what I want to do is I want to take one side of the sphere and I want to kind of sculpt it out as if it were Play-Doh. So if I go into edit mode, what I'd like to be able to do is grab this vertex right here, and I'd like to be able to pull it out and have the whole side of the shape kind of get pulled with it, as if it were made of Play-Doh. However, what I find is that if I pull on this guy, it just extrudes the one, or it just pulls on the one point and creates this single point here. What I could do is maybe try and grab a bunch of points and say, okay, if I grab a bunch of points, maybe more of the shape will come with me. The problem here is that now if I pull, it looks like more of the shape comes with me, but this front piece is still flat, right? I'm not getting a gradual, smooth sculpture. I'm not creating something that is as if I'm working with clay. So we need a new type of tool. And that tool is called, I'm going to get rid of my subdivide notes since we used those last time, proportional editing. Proportional editing allows us to smoothly sculpt vertices and faces. So let's see what that looks like. Our shortcut for proportional editing is O. Now before I press O, I would like you guys to keep an eye on something. Down here is a little gray circle. This is how we can turn on proportional editing. If I press O, watch what happens to that circle. It turns blue, and a little menu opens up next to it. When this circle is blue, we know that proportional editing is turned on. So now let's see what happens if I pull on this vertex. Now I'm getting a nice gradual sculpt. It's as if I've grabbed this single point on a doughy surface and I'm pulling and sculpting the dough outward. So proportional editing has given us a much smoother way of changing our shape. Now, one thing you'll notice is that it's smoothing our shape very broadly, right? So a lot of this shape is getting pulled by our single point. We can control how much of the shape is affected by using our scroll wheel while we pull on the vertex. So while sculpting, we can scroll to change the size of the editing. So I'm going to grab on and I'm going to start pulling, but I'm going to scroll in. If I scroll my scroll wheel up, we can see that I'm affecting less of the shape. Almost like a magnifying glass. It controls exactly where my proportional editing is focused. That there? And I get a much sharper pull or sculpt depending on the smaller my proportional editing field is. So that's great, but we have more ways of controlling the sculpting than just changing the size. In addition to scrolling, we have what's called fall off. And fall off determines the shape as it's pulled. So we'll say determines how the shape changes when pulled. The most common ones are smooth and sharp. And if we look at this little menu next to our proportional editing, we can see that we have something called proportional editing fall off. And this allows us to change the way that Blender applies proportional editing to our shape. So smooth is what is activated by default. Let's see it one more time. Smooth is kind of a gradual pull on the rest of our shape. If we contrast that with sharp, I'm going to choose sharp partway up the list. Sharp gives me a much tighter angle, right? This is almost like I'm pulling on bubble gum or a balloon or something where I've got a very fine point and I'm stretching across the surface. However, we've got plenty of other different types of fall off to experiment with, and the goal is this little shape is kind of showing you roughly what it does. So root gives us a much more gradual pull. It gives us a much larger area that gets smoothed out as our shape is pulled. And then finally, we have things like constant, we have linear, we have inverse square, random. I encourage you guys to sort of play around with what all of these do. Random, you can see, just starts manipulating any point it feels like. Every time I grab this, it's going to manipulate different points just to see what happens. Constant is going to try to keep points together. So points that belong together, it's going to keep together. But there's all different types here, and you guys can experiment with whichever fall off you think works the best. But smooth and sharp are our most common, and smooth is always on by default. So let's talk a little bit about what you guys are going to do in class with the proportional editing view. I'm probably going to be out the day that you guys do this, so I'm going to show you an example of what I'd like you to do, and then you guys are going to have an opportunity to put it into practice in class. I'm going to get rid of this sphere. We are going to create a scene for our lighthouse. And we're going to create a scene by making a coastline. The coastline is going to require two things, the subdivide tool, and it's also going to require proportional editing. So let's go ahead, put my cursor here, and I'm going to add a plane to represent the ground to my scene. Now, just like I did in the city skyline and the subdivide video, I'm going to go to my object settings, the golden cube, and I'm going to scale this guy up to 8 times its size. Now, what I want to do is pull part of this up to be able to make a coastline, and then I want to use proportional editing to make it look uneven and rocky. To do this, I'm going to go into top view. So remember, we can either use number pad 7 or we can go to view and do top. And I'm also going to go to orthographic view for this. Now, in edit mode, I'm going to subdivide a bunch of times, probably 6 times. I'm going to hit subdivide 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I've got a bunch of points that I can select. And I'm going to click just one of these guys on the very corner. And using my C-select tool, I am going to select only the parts that I want to be the coast. So I'm going to select this corner. I'm going to press C. And now I'm going to kind of outline. I'm going to make a rough outline of what I want this coast to look like. It's going to kind of go diagonally across my plane like that. Now, I'll expand this guy up, fill in the rest very carefully. This. Remember, all I'm doing is scrolling to change the size of my circle. It's using the scroll wheel while I select. All right, this is going to be my coastline. You guys can make your coastline whatever shape you'd like, but keep in mind that to get a rocky Maine-style coastline, we're going to want it to be kind of uneven, like we've done here. So now I'm going to change my view, and I'm going to go into right view, and I'm going to extrude this guy up a little bit, about that high, let's say. And if we look, we can see that we're starting to create what's going to be our cliffs. The issue here is that if I want to start making cliffs, I need them to be rough and more sculpted. What we're going to do is take a single point, take a look at it right here, and we're going to start moving that point downward so that we end up with these areas where our coast is starting to look rocky. So I want to move this guy all the way down. this guy all the way down. We're going to grab this guy and move him as well. But all I'm doing is grabbing these edges of my coastline and moving them down. And then some places back here, I may even decide to move them up a little bit, create a little bit of a hill or a rise in our coastline. Drop this guy down, maybe even drop this guy down. Keep in mind that whatever you pull down, like these bottom parts right here, we're not going to see them. What we're going to do after we're done with this entire coastline is we're going to cover half of it in water. So all of these pieces right down in here, let's see, show this a little. I'm not going to see any of this. The water is going to cut it off right about here. So we want to make sure when we're pulling down our points that they go below where the water is going to be. And that's what's going to make our coastline look more realistic. What I want you guys to do is continue doing this process, moving points up and down all the way along our coast. Once you do that, so once we've got this entire coastline done, and we've added some hills and whatnot, I want you guys to go find a texture for the entire coastline. So maybe look for rocks or grass or something like that. Something that'll make it look a little bit more realistic and three-dimensional. And don't forget all the texture settings that we talked about. Go back and check out that video if you need to. But we're going to be using textures, maybe use some geometry to make it look rough, change the specular intensity so that it's not so bright, something like that. But keep in mind all those different tools we have at our disposal with textures. And what you can always try using some of the different types of fall off. So like if I put random in here, I'm going to get some really weird effects for my coastline, right? This area, maybe this is an area of really jagged rocks where the waves just come in and crash around. And I've got all kinds of crazy stuff that happens with my random fall off modifier. I can try, if I really want some gradual hills, I could try sphere modifier, get a little plateau over here. There's all kinds of different ways that you guys can modify this landscape. Create a coastline, be creative. Create a coastline that you know will look good with your lighthouse, because we're eventually going to bring our lighthouse in here. We're going to add an ocean, and this is going to be the basis for our first complete scene that we build. And proportional editing is incredibly powerful for building uneven, organic surfaces like this. Thanks for watching.